I'm Rich Andreski, Bureau Chief for Public Transportation at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I'd like to welcome you to Along the Lines, a podcast series where we'll explore current issues and ideas on Connecticut's public transportation system. Welcome to another episode of Along the Lines. I'm your host, Rich Andreski from the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Today, we're going to explore the role transportation has on housing choices and academic opportunity. We might think of transportation systems as utilities. When we turn on the tap, we expect water to flow. When we want to travel, we expect our roads, rails, and bus lines to be there for us. These systems are essential to the economy and ability to connect with each other and our communities. It cannot be overstated that transportation has a profound effect on our lives, influencing where we live, work, and to how we participate in civic life. Connecticut is a national leader in many respects. We have robust philanthropic and advocacy organizations. We have fantastic private and public universities. Connecticut is third in the nation for citizens with a higher education degree. We have among the highest household incomes, ranked sixth in the nation. But there is a great divide between those who are succeeding and those who are struggling to get by. The ability to find a good paying job or access to educational opportunities is a factor of where you live and the availability of transportation. For many people, mobility is a struggle. Not everyone has access to a car, and finding an affordable home near transit can be difficult. COVID-19 has exacerbated these inequalities and put additional strain on the publicly funded transportation system. What can be done to create affordable housing and give everyone a chance to access educational opportunities? My guests today are finding solutions and success. The Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system, under President Mark Ojakian's leadership, has forged new paths to expand affordable access for students from all backgrounds. Mark championed a statewide UPass transit card that allows students to make unlimited trips on public transportation. And Sean Ghio, Policy Director for the Partnership for Strong Communities, is making progress on affordable housing and challenging conventional thinking on how we design our communities. Gentlemen, welcome. Yeah, and thanks for making the time. And Mark, congratulations on your upcoming retirement. We're really going to be sorry to see you leave in your role as president, but I want to say a special thanks to all the contributions you've made to public life here in Connecticut. So Sean, why don't you start us out? Please introduce yourself a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about Partnership for Strong Communities and the role that you play in advocating for affordable housing.
I'm Sean Ghio. I'm the Policy Director at Partnership for Strong Communities. We're a statewide housing and homelessness advocacy organization. We advocate for policies to end homelessness in the state and to expand housing opportunities in the state.
And Partnership for Strong Communities, what's the history there of that organization?
Sure. It really comes out of a movement to find a comprehensive approach to end homelessness in Connecticut. And it was created about 20 years ago through the generosity of the Melville Charitable Trust, which is a charitable trust that's entirely focused on ending homelessness. They've allowed us to focus on this work for the last 20 years. And through really a comprehensive, what's called collective impact model, bringing everyone together, the state of Connecticut has been a leader for really more than a decade on dealing with and ending homelessness.
Sean, thanks. And I'd like to think that as one of the wealthiest states in the country, we can make a significant progress in that area. So thank you for joining us today. Mark, over to you. Can you tell our listeners about your history with the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system and your role in getting that UPass program off the ground?
Well, thank you once again for asking me to participate today. Yes, I am the president of the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities system here in Connecticut. It's comprised of 17 institutions, 4 regional public universities, 12 community colleges, and then Charter Oak State College, which is Connecticut's online four-year institution. 85,000 students in the system, 95% from Connecticut. So we really educate Connecticut's citizens. And when I first took over as president of the system, it became apparent to me through many interactions with students that transportation was an issue for our students. Many of our students are first generation going to college. Many of our students are parents. Most of our students, if not all of our students, work at least one job and don't have their own vehicles. So getting to and from school was a real challenge for them. And the cost to them, for example, of a bus pass at the time, which was, I think, like $63 per month, was really prohibitive in terms of them being able to get into school and stay in school once they became enrolled. So because I had been involved in government for many years, I was Governor Malloy's chief of staff. I picked up the phone. I called former Commissioner Jim Rediker. I said, Jim, we have an opportunity here to not only increase ridership on our buses and trains, but also to give our students an opportunity to have really affordable public transportation. And so we partnered to form the UPass program, which for $20 a semester, a student can take unlimited rides on a train or a bus within the confines of the state of Connecticut. It's been a tremendous success. Each semester, I believe we issue, over 65,000 passes to our students. And every time I go back and visit a campus, one of the things that students tell me is how grateful they are that we were able to develop this partnership. And it really has allowed them to stay in school and complete their education.
Sean, maybe you could talk a little bit about why you see housing as such a critical role. I mean, granted, giving individuals who don't have homes a chance to have shelter, right? A right that they should have shelter. That's fairly straightforward. But going a step beyond, how does housing play a role ultimately in individual success?
Well, there's a large body of research really around housing as a critical piece in the puzzle for success as in your youth, success as you mature and go through school and enter the workforce. And stable housing, healthy housing that allows you to easily access the opportunities of your community. And I think why I spend a lot of my time, the bulk of my time, talking about increasing housing choice in the state. And what I mean by that is a choice of the kind of housing you might want to live in, whether it's a larger single family home. There's plenty of those in the state. An apartment, a duplex, but also the location of that home. Is it in a rural setting, in an urban setting, in a village center setting, in an old mill village setting? And I think all those, when you have that variety, you're allowing for each of us, each of our children, to find the most opportunity for them, the most options for them to succeed. And let me give an example. One of the ways I mean that is work commute. If you're a child and your parents rely on public transit, but don't, and they found somewhere affordable to live, but don't have an easy means to get there other than through public transit. And if there isn't close access to that, then your parents aren't home as often. Longer commutes directly impact both the health of the individual, but also the health of the overall family. So really what I want to focus on is increasing that mix that a potential of options for families and housing, types of housing, and where it is really critical.
So, Mark, is housing a challenge for your students? I tend to think very often that college students have access to student housing, but you pointed out rightly that many of your students are part time. They're holding jobs. So, how important is housing in terms of addressing educational opportunity?
Housing is very important as we look at the whole spectrum of educational opportunities. While we do have residential universities, a majority of students at our universities do not live on campus. They commute. They're from Connecticut. They may have their own apartment or they still live with their families. Even more important in terms of housing and education are students at our community colleges. Many of those students, as I indicated, first generation, part time, work 1, 2, 3 jobs, have children, take care of elderly parents. So they have a lot of challenges on their plate even before they enter a community college campus. So having housing opportunities that are consistent with transportation opportunities is critically important.
There is a dearth of affordable housing in certain places. We see a concentration of affordable housing in certain communities and a relative paucity in others. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing a recognition of this, and are we addressing it? And should we be doing more?
I think that there is a slow, and too slow for my feeling, recognition of the critical part that housing plays in family success in Connecticut. We have a long way to go, I think, for people to recognize that really there's a variety of things, ways of living that are Connecticut. And affordable housing, generally, what makes it affordable is in one part is it uses less land, than a large single-family home on a large lot, which I think a lot of our communities have a lot of. So, but I do think there's a growing recognition that our suburban history, has contributed to racial segregation in our state, which we know is very concentrated. It's contributed to socioeconomic segregation in our state, which is also very concentrated. If you go back before the suburban boom, Connecticut lived in a way that really did rely on public transit and the ability to live more closely together to do a lot of the daily tasks of life. And I think, and what I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of our town centers that we love, West Hartford Center or Windsor Center in the Hartford region are two great examples. You can do a lot without a car. And if you go back 70 years or a little bit longer, in our grandparents' lifetimes, perhaps, they did that and they had transit options and they led very fruitful lives.
Connecticut's called the land of steady habits for a reason, and change in our state is very hard and very slow. So, kudos to Sean for the great work that he and his organization, are doing to sort of change that.
And I'd like to go back to the students and the ability for students to access opportunity. And I think we all would recognize that students fall into the category of individuals that may not have a lot of income. And Mark, you talked about the fact that many of your students, particularly on the community college side, are commuters and have to juggle other lives outside of school, plus figure out transportation. So how much of a game changer was the UPass program, and are you seeing dividends on that yet in terms of student engagement and enrollment?
So before COVID hit, so because everything sort of changed in terms of the enrollment trends, demographics, it was a huge game changer because students were able to go to their class if they had to go to work. They could leave campus. They could go to their job. They could go back to school at night and not have to spend extra money just in order to get uh, to school. So it was a huge incentive for students not only to enroll but to be able to stay in school and ultimately complete their education. Because as I indicated earlier, many of our students go part time. Many of our students are students of color. Many of our students are sort of congregated in sort of urban or semi urban centers, and they're non traditional. So they're not your typical 18 to 21-year-old student going full time. They're 30, they're 40, they're 50, they're returning veterans. There's a whole new sort of generation of students that is populating our community colleges. So it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, I wonder, and Sean, I'd love you to weigh in on this too. With rising housing prices, that was the one unexpected. Perhaps others expected it. I didn't. When COVID set in February and March of this year, um, some thought maybe that the real estate market, the housing market, would take a nosedive, but the reverse happened. What we've seen is a strong gains in real estate values. We're seeing lots of individuals moving from New York City up to Connecticut, and I'm wondering, that's exacerbating and putting this additional pressure on the availability of housing in general.
What I think of is um, housing quality. And that might seem strange to you, but let me something Mark was talking about Winstead and students that access community college there and other schools. Um, and why I'm thinking of housing quality is we unfortunately Connecticut has been for a combination of factors. There's been very little growth in new housing construction, particularly single family. And thanks to state investments over the last decade, there's been a lot of multifamily construction to a degree, larger, generally larger, and generally not in smaller towns that outside the urban centers as much. But so why I think about housing quality is if we don't build new housing and we have an influx of residents, then it puts more pressure, downward pressure on tenants to be priced out of really older homes into even cheaper, more affordable places to live, often in some of our older, say, three-family homes or duplexes that are really still a predominant feature of our housing stock in a lot of our smaller towns like Winstead and Torrington, and really across the state. And I then, in my feeling, that restriction in housing supply means folks are living in older homes, including all of us, than we might otherwise live in a place that allows for housing to be built more easily. And for our lowest income families, it means they're living in the poorest quality housing, which can be quite poor. So that's what I think about when I think about these potential in migration, pressures from folks moving into the state.
So, what incentives can we create collectively to address this issue? UPass to me was a home run for a few reasons. From a transportation standpoint, it eliminated the barrier to access. Right, didn't need to have change in your pocket to ride a bus or a train. But wonder if there's other strategies that we collectively together can look at to really get to the heart of this, housing and transportation issue. We've invested quite a bit in our bus and rail system, and the DOT is now thinking about the long term post COVID. What does our transportation network look like? We're talking about routes and services. Will ridership come back? And I wonder if both of you can share some advice for the DOT in terms of, how should we be thinking about investment in transportation?
I think we're going to see post-COVID sort of a new normal in terms of work, in terms of where people work, how people work. But we're also going to need to focus on how do we get people back out into the communities to provide sort of economic opportunities to our businesses. And so I think we're going to have to look at creative ways of giving people incentives to ride public transportation. And I think that has to go hand in hand with sort of making it simple, making it easy. And, if somebody has to ride a bus and there's, 3 transfers, they're not going to do it. So how do we do it, sort of a little differently? And then how do we look at this as a whole function, housing, education, and transportation, as part of our economic development strategy for the future?
Sean, what do you say?
I think connectivity is critical, and obviously that's related to, in terms of new investments, decisions about routes and locations and so forth. And I think part of that is the recognition that the state, through either state investments or using federal investments, is putting a lot of money into a local community and a lot of opportunity into a local community when it makes transit investments. And I think of the Hartford line because it's a recent investment. And I look at what some communities have done, like Meriden and Berlin, and I think Windsor Locks. There's been a lot of investment in housing and other uses in the station area. Some of there are some affordable housing units. Some of it is just market rate. I think the state, I think in the rest of the world, let me put it this way, when transit is extended or expanded upon, it's normal, I think, for our public officials to think about the value that they just added to local property owners, to the property tax base of a town, and therefore there should be some recognition by local folks that this is a state good, and there have to be state benefits to it. It's not just entirely a local benefit. And I look at a lot of Metro North stations in Fairfield County and think, where is the state benefit other than getting some select commuters quickly into Manhattan, which of course is a very large benefit. Some of those high wage earners, we want them in Connecticut, but what else can we expect from towns when we use our tax dollars to improve their town? And I think part of that is saying you have to have more housing near these stations. We want to maximize the use of these stations.
Sean, that's right. We have a publicly funded asset. These transit investments don't come cheaply, but I do think they provide a substantial return on investment. I'll point out to our listeners that the Hartford line and CT Fast Track were built with substantial federal funding. We leveraged state transportation program dollars to draw down hundreds of millions in federal funding. And then I would also argue that the measure of success on public transportation needs to be a much broader look. Traditionally, folks want to know how many riders do we have and what is the bottom line? Are we generating or minimizing the public subsidy for the service? And I would argue really we need to look at the total return on investment. And that is access to educational opportunity, access to housing, access to employment opportunity, and economic development. Each of these transit projects brings with it opportunity for economic development, new housing, new commercial space.
I would just like to offer an example of that. In Windsor Locks, development I'm sure you're familiar with. There's a giant old textile and then wire mill, Montgomery Mills, that was redeveloped into 160 apartments, many of them set aside as affordable, capital A. Uh, the developer gave a presentation yesterday where she was very explicit that one of the primary reasons for for them going forward there was access to commuter rail and its location in the center of Windsor Locks. And the economic development spin-offs from that are already happening. So I just wanted to give you that example. Is really, you're right. It's too narrow to talk just about ridership. Transit does way more than that, and we should be recognizing that.
Thank you. And I want to go back to something Mark said, which is the idea of more streamlined connectivity. If individuals have to make um, cumbersome transfers and take multiple buses and trains, they're not going to do it. And so one of the evolutions that we're thinking about is, should we really be mobility managers? The idea that we have a bus system and a rail system and really nothing in between, and we individuals are increasingly accustomed to going when they want to go. The rise of Uber and Lyft and the rise of other services means that transportation can be at your fingertips. It doesn't come cheaply, but transportation is more available than it's ever been. What are the one or two things we can do in transportation and housing to make sure that our students thrive and succeed, and perhaps choose to also stay here in Connecticut?
I think what we need to do is to take a look at maybe some more innovative approaches to that kind of transportation need. So I think when we talk about, at least my bias has always been, when we talk about these things, we have to remember that many of the folks that live in Connecticut that need the educational opportunities, that need the affordable housing, are probably the same folks that are not going to be able to take advantage of some of these newer, more expensive transportation opportunities. So I think we need to remember sort of the whole demographic of Connecticut as we move forward, and not forget those students who live in those urban or semi-urban areas, and especially those students of color that have challenges because of the other sort of obstacles in their lives.
That's great advice, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll keep that in mind as we think about new mobility options. Sean, how about you?
Well, I agree with Mark. I think connectivity is really one of the critical things. We have over the last, my lifetime and longer, created this very dispersed way of living, and I believe, which makes connectivity difficult for folks at DOT and others. But it's absolutely essential to continue on that path, making the connections easier. In this case, for the diverse student body that we have. But I also think that with COVID, there's been so a lot of, I think, conversation around the return to the cities. Sort of, we were seeing this renaissance in a lot of cities, the major cities, definitely across the country, and there's a lot of talk now of that having ended, and I believe that's not the case in Connecticut. One is because in relation to these major cities, a lot of younger folks across the country don't think of our cities as big cities, there still are, none of our cities are at their peak population, I think, other than maybe Stamford. All of our cities were larger in the past and can accommodate many, many more people. And I think the best connectivity is co-location, I think, and you see that with, I think now we have, downtown Hartford is a great example. of possibilities with a concentration of higher education now that wasn't there a decade ago, with community college, with UConn, with St. Joseph University's has a program there, Trinity. There's a lot of opportunity to make that easiest connection, which is to live close to where you need to go.
Sean, thank you for that. The ultimate goal here is we are in a place where our policy goals very much are in alignment, and we have an opportunity with COVID and a lot of the changes that are happening here in how people live and work. We have opportunity ahead of us in terms of new leaders at the local, state, and federal levels. We have new opportunities in terms of technology that's facilitating the way folks take classes and participate and hold employment. And so I think I couldn't be more happy with sort of the creative thinking and commitment that both of you have shown to your respective causes. We're going to have to wrap up here. I'd like to turn it back, though, briefly for any closing thoughts you might have. So, Sean, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Rich, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with Mark. I just want to reiterate some of what you said. I very much appreciate your commitment to the state and involvement and really so many positive changes in the state. So it's an honor to be able to be on the same program with you. So, and thank you and enjoy your retirement.
Well, thank you. I feel like this is my virtual retirement party. But I appreciate it. No, it's my pleasure to have participated today. And Sean, continue the great work that you're doing. And after January 1st, I'll just listen to the podcast in the future, Rich.
Thanks. We'd love to have you as a listener, Mark. Thank you so much. And with that, I just want to again express my appreciation for your time and insightful thinking on these important topics. So with that, I'm Rich Andreski with the Connecticut Department of Transportation. You've been listening to Along the Lines. Thanks for listening to this episode of Along the Lines. This is your host, Rich Andreski. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe and share.